All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cognition Ignition. Thanks for being here. If you are here, let me know in the chat. Uh, just say, hey, what's up? Let me know if you have any questions during the stream. And I'm just kind of taking after Jordan Peterson. He goes on these quests, right? And I was like, maybe I could go on a quest. I don't think I'm nearly as smart as Jordan Peterson. Um, but I have listened to him a lot, and if I'm being honest, I actually miss that he doesn't put out his podcast like he usually does. And right now, I see he's putting out some of his lectures back onto into the podcast space, and I've been listening to them. And a lot of what my channel has become since Jordan Peterson has left has been encouraging men to kind of speak up about their truths, their experiences, and um, kind of help other people grow, kind of fill the shoes of Jordan Peterson while we were waiting for him to get better. And I think Jordan Peterson was filling the shoes of people like Jung and Freud and a bunch of other people who were thinking past the surface level interpretation of reality. Um, and I think it's a very hard thing to do, but it is worth doing. A little bit of background. I come from a pretty much blue collar background, um, though there was some white collar activities because I worked in healthcare for a long time. Um, I was the administrator of a facility, and I think I was always kind of deterred from thinking about things in an abstract way. I was pressured to do things more practically, and I think that's a problem for a lot of men. Um, and when somebody like Jordan Peterson came out or Carl Jung, they kind of, I think, set the direction for masculine people to kind of find their way in the world in a more holistic, all encompassing sense by bringing up things like archetypes and pattern recognition or um, the anima and animus. These are the archetypes within us, right? Um, and over the past 7 or 8 years, I have been using these models to help myself navigate reality. It was a big reason why I think I left business and went to school. Um, it was a big reason why I started to get in touch with my spiritual side a bit more. Because the archetypes are patterns of reality. And what you're going to see is that Jung never really defined the archetypes in their entirety. And I'm going to show you a video of Jordan Peterson talking about this. But he understands that the reason that Jung never really was able to identify all of the archetypes um, was because they exist at different levels of analysis. Now, what does that really mean? It means that they are all encompassing. You can look at the archetypes from a biological perspective, or you can look at the archetypes from a cosmic perspective, or anywhere in between there. Um, like I said, I use it for my son, so I use it in that cognitive way, psychological way, trying to promote his growth, um, trying to make sure he goes through the stages of initiation. That way he can have the archetypes within him activated, because that is what happens in modern biology and psychology. I would probably relate I would relate the archetypes to epigenetics in a way. When yourself interacts with the zeitgeist in a specific way, changes within you occur, and those are the archetypes that are emerging. And some archetypes emerge because that is what is called for in the zeitgeist, and sometimes they do not emerge because of the condition of the zeitgeist at any given time. And, you know, A big thing about it is that it is an archetype. So that means that there is an actual arc to it. There's a starting point. There are points within the middle, and then there's an end point. So you can kind of look at the starting point as the beginning of your life, and then the end point as the end of your life. And it's everything that was that was that had occurred within those points of your life. And then, the archetype is about wholeness. What we usually see is one-sidedness, but the archetype, at the other end of the archetype, is everything that was still unconscious to you in a way. And the thing about archetypes is like the way I've used them for years, like on this channel with personality types, is you can see the archetypal patterns of an individual. That is without a doubt. But then, there are other ways to get a little bit more analytical with it, where, you can see archetypal patterns within an individual. So John Beebe has his 8-function model, which I have talked about a lot, and I've been studying even more lately. And this goes along with Carl Jung's cognitive functions. And his idea is that and these ideas have been kind of built on over the past multiple decades. Jordan Peterson was doing it, but many other people have done it. So the idea that there is a hero function within each person. And then, Myers-Briggs captured that, and they actually did, they identified our common archetypes within basically the United States. We are a capitalist country. We were moving towards basically building up the country, putting people into the workplace, educating people, and doing things like that. So within that, there were a bunch of patterns of people that were needed. So for one, one of Carl Jung's cognitive functions is extroverted thinking. Archetypally, it's related to a CEO in the Myers and Briggs assessment, right? So archetypally, that extroverted thinker is a CEO, and then so that means that is his hero. That when somebody who is an extroverted thinker uses that function or expresses that function or the components of that function, he will appear archetypally like a hero. He will be doing something that has an impact, and he will do it better than people who don't have that function as a hero would do it. And then there are also feelers. And a lot of times these are the people who build communities, set social standards, and when they are doing that, they are engaging with people. This is a pattern. You would see them engaging with people, directing people, moving people, being compassionate with people. These are all micro patterns within that larger archetype of extroverted feeling. And when an extroverted feeler integrates all of those different patterns, they will look like a hero using that function. And the reason I wanted to start here was because I think it goes really good with Carl Jung's idea of the great man. Basically, he talked about a tribe that was a bit more primitive than what we see in modern society. He talked about the Naskapi. I'm hoping I pronounced that right. I read it, so that is how I am pronouncing it. And basically, his idea was that because they did not have a social structure the way we see now. They didn't have any religious beliefs. They didn't have a community. They were basically living on their own, individually, one at a time. They would be born, they would get raised, and then they would go out and do their own hunting. And his idea of this, with this story, was that he was trying to think of how did they know what to do? How did they know to go hunting? How did they know to prepare their food? How did they know how to live and all these things? And how the story goes is they would um, they would listen to their inner voice, which is basically um, the self um, and the great man. You can look at the self and the great man in alignment, and both of these are archetypes, like the pattern of having a conversation in your head. And he gave it the archetype of the great man, and then there's also the self, and then so that's in the middle. So that's why I started with personality, just kind of explaining like there are these archetypal patterns of people, and then if you went one way, you would get to the ego. And if you went to the other way, you would get to um, the shadow and the anima. Um, and each of those are archetypes. So the ego is basically how you fulfill the hero archetype, right? And then the anima is based on your sex. So if you are a male, you will have the anima. And if you are a female, you will have the animus. And it is the opposite energy of your biological sex, basically. And the idea is that this comes online later in a person's life. So for a man, it could be like, when he has children, maybe he becomes more compassionate. Um, Also, maybe like a lot of times when men went to war and they saw um, their companions die, or the men that they were working with die, maybe they became affected by that emotionally, right? And that is the idea of the anima. And then this continues on through life. And I've talked about, some of the mainstream influencers I've seen who I think have the right story, but they aren't taking on the right archetypal role, where they could be a bit more compassionate with the people that they are leading, a bit more understanding of their reality and things like that. And, I think that is a male integrating the feminine side, not necessarily becoming a female, but accepting the fact that there needs to be this balance of their toughness and their aggressiveness and their rigidness with the kindness and compassion actually needed to move things forward, get people on board with you, right? Um, and then there's the shadow, which are other parts of yourself which may have been neglected. And I would say these are probably more of the characteristics that would relate to your sex, right? So if you're a male, like maybe you acted cowardly. Maybe you didn't confront evil when it was in front of you or something like that, right? And so then your ability to confront evil or be aggressive in the face of evil, and take action is in your shadow, right? And then, there are also times when it would be better to kind of take a step back and plan and organize and don't just act, right? And some people may have um, those characteristics in their shadow. If they were just quick to act and aggressive, there's a good chance that in their shadow is something that wants to spend more time planning, more time, determining the right way to do something, um, based on reality in a way. So we have that. You have your great man, which is the inner voice inside your head. Um, and and then on each end of that, you have the ego, which is the stuff that you choose to do, the shadow, the stuff that you choose not to do, not to integrate, basically. Um, and then, within that, there were other archetypes, the trickster, um, the animal, like I said, the critic, and all of these are things that I will talk about in an upcoming video more focused on personality. Today, I just want to give a broad conceptualization of this, so that's what we're kind of doing. So Carl Jung said that basically the way that the Naskapi tribe was able to survive was by listening to the voice inside her head. And he was also explaining that in modern times, people are not in touch with that voice inside their head. They may not actually, even if they understand it's there, they may not know what it is signaling to them or what it is telling them to do. And he also says, um, the voice inside your head may stop you from going into your shadow if your shadow means that it would be something bad for you. Um, so then, that maybe because people aren't actually in touch with the voice inside their head, we see some of the chaos that we see in society, and we see some of the bad behaviors we see in society, um, because we aren't in touch with the great man, the inner voice that knows where we are going. He compares this to a seed in a way. If you had a pine tree, or if you had a seed for a pine tree, it has everything that that pine will need for its life to get to where it needs to be. And that's the idea of the great man. It knows everything you need to get to where you need to be. You would need to listen to it. And that's the archetype. And over time, I think this has been like called God. This has been called, um, there's other names for it. I know it goes with the Akashic records and things like that. There's just a bunch of ways that like civilizations have interpreted this voice, this inner substrate that holds all the memories and can direct your growth and things like that. So that was the first touching point of a depth look at archetypes. And it was basically, I'm going to share the books that I am referencing, because I think more people should read Jung. I've been saying it for a long time. I think he has the best model of the psyche, and a lot of people have contributed to that over time. I think there could be way more contribution to this. So a lot of the stories that I just shared about the self and the Naskapi tribe and all that was from this book, Man and His Symbols. I pretty much go to this book every either few months or a few years, depending on like where I am in life, and kind of just retouch on some of these ideas. And even in the book, it states like the reason that his hypothesis was so broad was because there are so many levels of analysis to this, which was also something Jordan Peterson talked about, in which I think I am going to show you right now. And the reason that I want to show you this right now is because I'm going to show you the next book as well after we watch this. But, my channel started as talking about personality. And as I got more into learning psychology, sociology, and more into Jung, listening more to Jordan Peterson, I started to realize like Jung wasn't really talking about personality. He was talking about an entire social system. It really was. So what I'll do is I'll share this clip of Jordan Peterson, and then I will read this one. This was The Undiscovered Self. I'm just going to read the back of it, and you're going to kind of get an idea of the bigger picture that Carl Jung was seeing. And I think it's going to help a lot of people. So let's start with this clip of Jordan Peterson. It's about 4 minutes, but I have it on. It'll be sped up a little bit.
Now, when Jung talked about archetypes, it was never clear what he meant, and I think the reason for that was because the archetype is a very complicated idea and a very complicated phenomenon, and you can think about it biologically, and you can think about it socially, and you can think about it as something that the individual participates in creating. So it's not that easy to localize it, and as well, it's not that easy to localize it, and as well, Jung was never clear about what the universe of archetypes looked like. And sometimes he spoke as if they were a relatively small number, and then at other times he spoke as if they were innumerable. And I think the reason for that is, in part, it depends on the level of analysis, right? The more transcendent the archetype, the fewer they are, but they differentiate, because you might say, well, how many hero archetypes are there? And one answer could be one, but they differentiate all the way out into a diverse range of works of fiction that we have. So you could say there's as many variants of the hero archetype, roughly speaking, as there are works of fiction. So think about it as a hierarchy with the ultimate archetype at the top. So then another question
All right, so what you're hearing from Jordan Peterson right here is that there is no real understanding of how many archetypes there are, and he says it's because that you can look at it through different levels of analysis, and that basically no one's ever mapped out the entire universe of archetypes. The reason is because you can look at that at different scales. Um, so one good way to really look at this is that like there are the archetypes of a government. And, you could just like, you can look at this as like, the president has one archetype, like a leader archetype, um, which is very similar to a CEO archetype in a business, except the president is running a nation, right? And then below him, he has cabinets, which he has cabinet people in his cabinet, right? And all those people have the same archetype as him within their subgroups. So like the director of health is playing the same archetypal role, but the people underneath him is a smaller group. And then, he has different groups that work, in each state, right? For there's just this director of health, and then he puts somebody in charge of those. And then each of those are basically acting on that pattern of extroverted thinking, which is about creating systems, building systems, moving towards a goal, completing something, using metrics, and then, relaying those metrics and then deciding what to do with it. And these archetypes will continue to like work up that hierarchy. And then within that, you also have extroverted feelers. So with the extroverted feelers, maybe they are looking, how do we build cohesiveness in a society? And this is something I'm going to show in another video after we finish watching Jordan Peterson. Actually, you know what? I think we should watch it right now. I'm going to show you two different archetypes in politics that sit at the top of the hierarchy because they were both presidents. And I'm going to show you their victory speech because I think that kind of shows you, they were fulfilling the same archetype in a different way. And what you're going to see is that the archetype it's triggering both feeling and thought. It is basically something that is all encompassing because it expresses the past, the present, and the future. It brings up the problems of the past and the plans for the future. It triggers somebody's thoughts and feelings. It gets them to think about who they are in relation to this idea. And then it propagates that idea farther. And, when a president gets elected, every cabinet member underneath him gets on board with his idea, his ideology. It becomes a meme of like, hey, we are going to do this. This is what we're working towards. So let's look at both of these videos and then we'll come back to Jordan Peterson in just a second. Because I'd rather watch Jordan Peterson, to be honest. But these are necessary. We're going to start with Obama when he was elected.
The power of our democracy. Tonight is your answer. It's the answer. Is anyone out there who still doubts that America is a place where all things are possible? Who still wonders if the dream of our founders is alive in our time? Who still questions the power of our democracy? Tonight is your answer. It's the answer told by lines that stretched around schools and churches in numbers this nation has never seen, by people who waited 3 hours and 4 hours, many for the first time in their lives, because they believed that this time must be different, that their voices could be that difference. It's the answer spoken by young and old, rich and poor, Democrat and Republican, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, Native American, gay, straight, disabled and not disabled. Americans who sent a message to the world that we have never been just a collection of individuals or a collection of red states and blue states. We are and always will be the United States of America. It's the answer that led those who've been told for so long by so many to be cynical and fearful and doubtful about what we can achieve, to put their hands on the arc of history.
All right, so I just wanted to point out what you just heard Obama say. It's to put their hands on the arc of history. So what I realize here is that the archetypes are recognized by so many people. The idea of like how things change. It's probably just on this subconscious level, but we do talk about the arc of history and the trajectory forward. So I do think like once you like internalize it, you realize, okay, there is an archetype. We can prop up the archetype. When somebody can express it the way like Obama is doing here, you can capture the minds of people and make them move towards the vision that you see. You'll see he talks about the problems of the past. He talks about the unity of everybody now. He's bringing in all these patterns that allow the majority of people to kind of attach to that mission and move towards it. So let's just finish watching what he says, and then we'll move on to the next one, because I think that'll be an interesting contrast, and you will see how a different narrative was able to move people through time. It was fundamentally the same message, but we're going to watch them.
Bend it once more toward the hope of a better day. It's been a long time coming, but tonight, because of what we did on this day, in this election, at this defining moment, change has come to America.
All right, so that was the first one. Now we're gonna watch Trump, and you will see. You'll hear the same backgrounds in the audience. It's such a broad message. But it's the same message, just a little bit of a different tone, but it is still able to capture the minds of people. And that's what we're kind of seeing with if you understand the archetypes, these are the kinds of things that you see.
My fellow Americans, our movement is far from over. In fact, our fight has only just begun. We are one movement, one people, one family, and one glorious nation under God. So with American pride swelling in our hearts and American courage stirring in our souls, I say these words to you tonight. We will make America powerful again. We will make America wealthy again. We will make America strong again. We will make America proud again. We will make America safe again. And we will make America great again. Thank you, Ohio. Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, so basically you can see like maybe the wording is a little bit different, but both of these former presidents, well, both people who made it to the office, because Trump is still the president, were able to articulate the archetype that was needed in a time at the specific time. And now we can go back to Jordan Peterson and see the importance of this.
Question might be, what does the landscape of ultimate archetypes look like? And I think that's what I tried to lay out, and that's what I'm trying to lay out in this diagram. So now, why do you want to know that? there's a practical reason, or there's a number of practical reasons as well as intellectual reasons. One of the most relevant practical reasons, as far as I'm concerned, is that integrating narratives, and so those would include political narratives, integrating narratives have their force because they draw on universal archetypes. Otherwise they wouldn't have any power, right? Because they're basically stories. Political stories derive their power from the underlying archetypal representations, obviously, because they have to be concerned with the things that people find important, right? How can you sell a political message to someone if it isn't about something they find important? And if it's important to them, it's going to be grounded at least to some degree in their biological in their biological substructure. I mean, if you're talking to hungry people about food, it's a story that you can tell, right? Because it hooks them deeply. It hooks deep into their motivational systems. To use a narrative of utopia, which is the land of milk and honey, roughly speaking, a very, very old idea, you're also tapping deeply into intrinsic human longings. And so the idea that political narratives incorporate archetypal themes is not really, it's not an idea that I would consider particularly controversial. Putting it that way might be. Okay, so the problem with political narratives, in my estimation, is that they can rapidly transform themselves into ideologies, and ideologies are dangerous for a variety of reasons, but the primary reason for their danger, I think, this is a hypothesis, is because of their one-sided nature. What happens is that they capitalize, parasitize, I think is even a better way of thinking about it, a profound underlying narrative, but they don't tell the entire story. And so then if you're looking for orientation in the world because you're fragmented and chaotic, and somebody provides you with a partial story, that's going to serve an integrating function. And it's one of the things you see in psychotherapy is that if you're chaotic and confused and you go see a therapist who has a particular kind of practice, Freudian, behavioral, cognitive, Rogerian, whatever, there's a high probability that undergoing that course of therapy is going to be good for you, and that you might even come to view your life in the terms of that therapeutic practice. And you might say, well, why is that therapeutic practice right for you? Maybe it could have been Rogerian instead of Freudian, say. And the answer to that is, yeah, well, it probably could have been, because roughly speaking, any coherent ordering principle is better than none. And so that's also a good way to think about human development from an intellectual perspective, is that partly what has to be provided to individuals as they mature into adults is some kind of ordering structure.
All right. So I really want to touch on that point of the ordering structure, because basically I do think that is what the archetype really, that what it fundamentally does is it orders our instincts. It allows us to express our instincts, the instincts that we would express if we were an individual without a tribe or a community, the things that we would do as humans who never learned language or never learned how to relate with one another or another person. We do as humans probably have these deep instincts of, like, we would go kill something in order for us to eat, right? We would probably take resource from people, right? And then, you know, as we evolved, we wrapped these instincts basically into archetypes, things that gave us meaning. Because I do think, like, you know, if we look at every animal, we can see, like, they do things that as humans we say we wouldn't do. You know, like a male lion may kill his cub or whatever. And I'm sure early humans had similar problems where it was like, because there was no meaning to a male that his kin was born, basically, there was a good chance that he would have, like, killed it. Maybe he became jealous that the kin was getting attention from the female. And then, you know, our society packed this into an archetype of father, and then, you know, it gave the man meaning. And that was probably one of the earlier archetypes. There were also other archetypes that have been explained of, like, basically how did we come to identify the world that we were living in. That's where I would say archetypes basically emerged from. It was the early patterns of being a human. And it was probably even deeper than that, or the patterns that formed the first human. Um, like for anyone who doesn't know, I do a lot of neuroscience and biopsych type of research. Um, and one thing I've always found interesting is that um, the human cell, there isn't just one type of cell. There are multiple types of cells, and they all have a specific role. And we know that cells started as single cell like basically a single celled organism, and then they became multicellular, right? And I think just the way I look at it, basically these neural networks had to be constructed, right? And there was probably a similar force in there where certain cells had to give up their autonomy to act in service of another one. Certain cells were probably more aggressive and took the control of another cell in order to create coherence within the body. And eventually, these created a hierarchy, and we know our brain works on hierarchy, um, that allowed an entire human to basically be formed, that can handle all of the complex patterns. We don't actually have to think about it. The patterns are being um, formulated underneath, right? And this is why I related this to epigenetics, because um, your genetics will send signals that your body should change the way it processes an input because of the epigenetics. It will say, okay, um, a lot of times, like if your cortisol is high, it may trigger the way that you respond to stress, or something like that. And then like a subtle thing that you can see is people start graying faster, or things like that. These are just more biological patterns. And now, as humans, we have more social patterns. That's one thing we should look at. And, another thing, because we've been in this little realm of politics, is like there used to be kings. And like now, you hear the narrative of no kings, right? Um, and at the same time, we don't really have kings in society the way that we used to. We aren't sending our soldiers on horseback to go to war or anything like that, but we have structures in our society that fulfill the role of king, right? Even if it's, the president is not a king, but between the power of the president and all of his cabinet members, they have the power of a king. They have the power to influence health. They have the power to influence war. They have the power to influence social systems or education. And all of these are points within a pattern, right? Within a pattern of control. And I think the idea that Jung was thinking about was that these patterns are on a trajectory to something certain. And that's kind of why I want to read the back of this, just so you get an idea, because I'm telling you, everyone thinks Jung was just personality. It wasn't just personality. And, if you want to just talk about personality, you're kind of wasting your time. I'm just going to be honest. Because what you're going to realize in a couple of years is the same thing everybody who really understands archetypes realizes. Every pattern you see right now will change eventually. But anyways, so in this challenging and provocative work, Dr. Carl Jung, one of history's greatest minds, argues that civilization's future depends on our ability as individuals to resist collective forces of society. Only by gaining an awareness and understanding of one's unconscious mind and true inner nature, the undiscovered self, can we as individuals acquire the self-knowledge that is antithetical to ideological fanaticism. But this requires that we face our fear of the duality of the human, the existence of good and the capacity for evil in every individual. Jung compellingly argues that only then can we begin to cope with the dangers posed by mass society, the sum total of individuals, and resist the potential threats posed by those in power. So yeah, that's why, I don't want to let Young's work go to waste. I don't want to sit here and act like we live in this world where it's like, oh yeah, you can be whatever you want to be. It's like, no, you have to fight for who you want to be. And the only way to do that is to recognize the archetypes and integrate them. And that is the truth. And you also have to have a higher order of meaning that allows you not to be possessed by the archetype. You want to integrate what is needed from the archetype, and we can evolve the archetype. Like we went from kings, we went from a soul leader, a king who ruled an entire nation, to now, we moved away from that, and you have a president who gets the final say, but it's not without all of the power underneath, making sure that it aligns with the vision of where something is going. And it's the same thing with our cells. Our cells are communicating nonstop. Every time I move my hands, my cells are communicating. My brain is communicating with my limbs, through cells, through neurons, and sending signals. And there are different cells doing different roles. The same way, like, not everybody who works underneath the president and his cabinet are extroverted thinkers. They have a different archetypal role. They may be more about stabilizing what is. We just saw on the front of the White House, they had the big UFC fight. That's an archetypal pattern. When you look at gladiators or anything like that, that's a pattern of a powerful nation. Just realize that too. And our leaders, the people who make it to leadership position, realize the archetypal patterns, and they're able to use them to inspire, to drive change, to encourage people. And oftentimes, because they hit on all of those primitive things, they hit on the problems of the past. They show a trajectory forward. They pick up on all the pieces of right now. And then internally, they're affecting the thoughts and feelings of people attached to this. And then it becomes like the driving force. And that's what Jordan Peterson and Young were talking about. Like Jordan Peterson said, it may be controversial to say things a certain way. I don't really care. I never have. I will say it a certain way as long as I know, yeah, that really is how it works. And that kind of really is how it works. And then you see this at lower echelons of society. You see it in institutions. They all have their own narrative. They have their own extroverted thinkers. In the leadership position, they have their people that are distributing the narrative or the meme or whatever it is that organization is trying to do. And that's why you have to look at this from different levels of analysis. And that's why, when you get into these smaller factions like the education system, yeah, you're going to have a very similar pattern, but it doesn't show up as like one archetype. Like you wouldn't name it that one archetype, because the important thing about the archetype is that you have to remember you have that self or the great man in between. And that's storing all of your memories, all of your experiences through life and all of that kind of thing. And that is going to affect the archetype. So, you can have an archetype emerge that is the same archetype from the past, but it is going to look completely different because of the individual who is possessed by that archetype, their experience, the change in the zeitgeist. And that's how I know like a lot of people's personality systems don't work, because they don't talk about the change of the zeitgeist. All Jung was trying to do was show people how things change. I mean, he was trying to warn people, like, if people don't understand it, they will get possessed by it, because that is the truth. And I just thought that was pretty interesting. I think if you try to put it into context, then you can kind of see it continuously happening, like over and over again. But, as a student, I will tell you, sometimes it is hard to put forth an idea because of the way things are done in academia. Though I am trying to move away from that, even though I'm going to finish up my degree. I still think you need to speak more of the truth of this than just follow the last poorly done research that's been done. It is more of an intuitive way of doing this, because what archetypes really do is like simplify complexity in a way. You know, you can look at somebody and say, okay, that person can be a leader after you pick up enough patterns within them. Oh, that person could be one of our great thinkers, or that person can move people, like, you know, move people towards a mission. You can look at these within people and begin helping them, but you can also look at it within the zeitgeist and begin protecting yourself, because so none of the archetypes that we hear of have experienced the technological shifts that we are going to experience. And I do think we are going to get back to a time when there is a king, whether we like it or not. And I think it is going to be driven by AI in all reality. It may not be called a king, it may not be go by that role, but there are definitely many ways that that archetype of control, stability, governance can be placed into AI and affect the trajectory of our future in a way. So, you know, because if we can think of our inner patterns as like an algorithm, they allowed us to emerge. Now, all of us humans are acting as that inner pattern of the zeitgeist, right? And now we are trying to allow a larger archetypal body to emerge. I guess that's a good way to put it. I'm trying to use words that, like, you know, if you hear it, it would probably make more sense. So yeah, that's where that is. And then another thing, so like all these are just notes I've been taking on this for years, but like today I was like, oh, let me just like kind of go through it again. Because I do think another thing to consider is that like archetypes are only going to emerge in an ideal environment that calls for their emergence. When we look at the difference between Obama and Trump's speech, you can see like Trump probably couldn't have gotten elected at the same time Obama got elected. Like, not because like only one could get elected, but like if other people were running, Trump didn't have the message for that period in the arc of society. Obama did. And Obama's message and the way he governed affected people. And it started to move the arc to a different location, right? And then when Trump emerged, it was the ideal time for that archetype. And I think a lot of people want to think there is an archetype, but like, no, there isn't one single archetype. There is archetypes. Like the idea that there is basically a cause and effect. And that's the thing, the way Jung even explained it, was that like not everything is causal, but if two things are so closely related that you can say there is like this causal effect to it. And I do kind of agree with that. Both presidents were the ideal. Both presidents contained the ideal archetypal pattern for the period in time that they were in the zeitgeist. And without one, the other one could not have emerged. And that's true. The same way, you know, if we want to go to cognitive functions, without sensation, thinking cannot occur. Without sensation, nothing can occur. Without intuition, you cannot act on your own. And all of these types of things. So there is always going to be every archetype is going to be contained within a larger archetype. That's a good way to really look at it. And, you know, it is the emergence of the archetype is going to depend on the zeitgeist. But then also so when the archetypes emerge, like when a certain specific archetypes emerge and changes the narrative, I do think you're also going to see former archetypal patterns shift as well. So like I've been talking about the extroverted thinker and the extroverted feeler. One thing I have noticed is that while archetypally in the past, extroverted thinking was the CEO, because we have moved to a society that focuses more on harmonizing and being compassionate and understanding of the individual and things like that. I do think that we've moved to a time where you actually see the archetype of a CEO often is fulfilled by someone who's using feeling. Where like I would almost say like modern CEOs are ENFJs a lot of times. And actually a lot of ENTJs are more like in the field working a lot of the time now, though that will shift again at one point. So it's very interesting because I said in the beginning, I wasn't going to tell you like, this is what I'm going to explain to you why it's complicated, but how you can see it all over the place over and over again. And you could try to do it with your kids. I would recommend starting with adults because if you can see how somebody got to where they are, then when you have your own kids, you can kind of make it easier to see where they could get to. And the more people, like as a business owner, I did this with everybody. So I think that's why it was easy for me to say, okay, I see the patterns of my son. I see the patterns of my daughter. I kind of see if they stay on that course where they can get to. It would take something significant in the zeitgeist to probably change that course, as long as it is fostered in the right way. And that's the thing is you can foster the archetype. I don't think you can ever force it. And then like Jung even kind of talked about it, like how he explained it is like a certain therapist couldn't get a certain client to do a certain thing because they see it from a different function. But I do think even an even higher principle than that, a higher order principle than that is that like people have the similar, they can have different functions, but they can have a similar vision of the future. And I think that's where you kind of see these political divides. If like, because if you look at like Republicans and Democrats, they don't share the exact same vision of the future, but you can definitely see that within that group of Democrats, like they agree to agree with each other, even if they don't agree on all the points, because enough of the pattern was met. And same thing with conservatives, enough of the pattern was met, even if they don't agree on everything. And then once the modern issues or current issues are settled or determined, then you would see a shift in those. And actually, like a lot of people would say that your modern centrist used to be a liberal kind of, where a lot of like people who identified as liberal moved more to the center or more towards like center right kind of, because that's the archetypal shift of a society. Once the left had enough power, right? Because the idea of the archetype is that they are what swing the pendulum as they emerge. They emerge when the pendulum needs to swing. The most powerful archetypes emerge when the pendulum needs to swing. And I do think actually like society has actually put in a safeguard mechanism that kind of makes it harder for the most powerful archetypes to emerge, especially in the United States, where we get a new president like every 4 to 8 years, depending on who gets voted out or anything. Like the king is not going to emerge in the traditional sense because of the way that our systems have been set up, the narrative that our system has been following. Nobody wanted that absolute rule, right? That was kind of the purpose of the United States, that people could have freedom of choice and not have to follow a king's choice in a way. And that though as you watch these narratives, you kind of see, okay, that was the narrative, then the narrative shifted, and it's the cycle of shifting narratives. The details change because the resource in the zeitgeist becomes more captured. Like there wasn't always technology where the narrative could change as fast as it can. And just thinking about that, isn't it crazy like how religion spread with no technology the way we have now? I'm just going to say like that is probably one of the most like in all of this, I was like, how did religion spread the way it does? Like, I don't see how it would spread like that now without like the force of technology, where technology is propped up as the religion in some way. Um, I don't know if anybody else wonders about that, but um, it is interesting that religion has been propped up. So like how it's all over the world. Like it is very, even all denominations of religion and everything. Um, I think that's kind of like something you can think about when you think of like these narratives and things like that. Um, ba, ba. I don't want to go too deep today because yeah, but there could be another episode where I kind of frame things specifically for it. But just a couple of my notes are that like so one of my biggest insights today was that like basically archetypes organize instincts into like a human pattern, right? Um, you know, then a good example of this would be like in politics, rather than kill your opponent, which used to be kind of normal. Now you would defeat them in a debate. Um, and a lot of times in these debates, if you remember Trump's debates, he wasn't actually arguing an idea. He was acting out a pattern that allowed the idea to spread. And that was a reality. And honestly, same thing with Obama. He was just being a soft, compassionate person that people felt that they could trust. They don't really have a message behind what they say. That's the thing. Um, but people pick up on the pattern and then create their own interpretation and then spread that message. And that's when you see things kind of get um, as reckless as they have been in our society lately. So that was just one thing I wanted to talk about. And I do think that like this is really important because I think if we recognize this, for one, we could work on ourselves, you know, getting in touch with our shadow, among other things. Um, we can recognize, and this would be called a projection, but we can recognize those sides of ourselves that we don't like in other people, and that would help us fix that pattern within us. We can help our children recognize the patterns. We can be more accepting of our children, understanding that they are learning how to overcome the patterns. Um, a lot of times when you go in the political realm or the spiritual realm or any of these other factions, I do see it's like hard for people to find some type of alignment because they're both possessed by an archetypal narrative. So I guess an idea would be to like help each other learn it, though I don't think society wants people to understand it, to be honest with you. That's why I don't think Jung is really taught in college or anything like that. If you want to learn Jung, you have to either go to a very elite Ivy League school and pay tons of money, or you would have to do it on your own. Most state colleges don't teach Jung. High school psychology doesn't really teach Jung that much. Maybe a sociology class does here or there, because his ideas are considered. I think they want to say abstract, but I think dangerous because um, they show how things change, um, and I think that's the meaning of the archetype. Um, yeah, and that's pretty much what I wanted to go over. today. If anybody has any comments or questions, just let me know. I have more things, but I'm not going to go over them today. We will do that in an upcoming video.